Okay, so pretty much right after Halo Infinite released, Luke and I decided to concoct a method to try to find a way to experience the Halo Infinite campaign cooperatively, even if co-op isn't coming to the game until May of next year. And the things that we went through to try to figure this out were interesting. We had a whole video dedicated to it, but long story short, the methodology that we used to figure out how to control Master Chief together, even though we live on opposite sides of the country, was a bit interesting, using a program called Parsec and me connecting to Luke's computer. We had a system where one of us can control half of the controller and the other can control the other half. And let's just say the campaign run definitely didn't go as smoothly as we thought it could have gone. And fortunately for us, this video is sponsored by Vite Ramen. We couldn't be more excited because Vite Ramen is healthy, it's easy to store, and it only takes 3 minutes to prepare. Not only does it have the protein, nutrients, and fiber you need so that it's so easy to eat, healthy, it's almost like cheating, but the quality and the flavor of the ramen noodles are honestly next level. It's like restaurant quality noodles that are still cheaper than ordering food on DoorDash or Uber Eats. Also, the guys over at Vite Ramen hooked us up with our own referral link, so if you guys buy ramen using our link down below, not only are you getting really tasty ramen, but you're also supporting Rocket Sloth directly, so we can make more content like this and the other content that we've been putting out. Also, when you order through our link, you get access to exclusive bundles that come with free chopsticks, a free hooked ramen spoon, and 2 high-quality vinyl stickers on top of your Vite Ramen noodles. And with code RocketSloth, you save an additional 10% at checkout. And the guys over at Vite Ramen are actually really big Halo fans. They're even Onyx rank in matchmaking. And we're not implying that Vite Ramen will make you better at Halo, but I mean, look, they're Onyx. So we finally decided that for the sake of this specific run, we would be playing with the controller split method, where we would switch off in 5-minute intervals, where all of a sudden, if we were on the left side of the controller, we would switch to the right, and vice versa. Now, starting things off, I had to look up and down when we started off, as you have to do the tutorial every single time you start up the campaign. And after going through the cutscenes, we began on the level warship, where we had to get a feel for walking around at first. It is a little bit interesting. However, we did ultimately decide for the sake of this run to make a little change to the button layout. Now, grappling is a very fun touch, and it's by default mapped to the right bumper, but we actually decided to switch it to the left bumper so that the movement of Master Chief is more fairly divided between the 2 players playing the game. It's just weird because if you're in control of looking already and being able to use the grapple, it means that you can just override whatever the left side player is trying to do. So we switched grenades and grapple around to make things more evenly divided, which we immediately learned does make movement much harder. However, it did make at least playing on the left side feel a lot more fun because you get a little gadget that you get to play with, and it is really fun to get to use that grappling hook. And it did mean that we would have to coordinate with each other much more when using the grapple hook, because one player has to look and the other one has to time the grapple shot. In this opening area, we kind of walked around a bit and we got a BR, and then we pushed up to where some of the grunts were. This whole coordinating thing with the grapple shot really came into play here, where I had to look just right and Luke would have to time the grapple shot, and we'd have to kind of communicate if we were trying to do something specific. Though we did end up dying when we got to the part in the level where the brutes come down the elevator. This area, we kind of had to refine our combat skills just a bit. Now, there is a pretty big skip to this level that we've talked about. If you go up to this door and punch it 3 times, for whatever reason, it opens up and you can just bypass the engine room. And instead, it gave us this long, empty hallway area where we could kind of really practice our movement and speed. And midway through, of course, we had to switch sides of the controller. Now, we also did run into some serious lag issues while using Parsec, which is something I think we're gonna have to just deal with in general, because it seems like whenever you're playing a game like this, you're completely based on however strong the internet connection is, and that seemed, at least on this first couple of levels, to be a very fluid and variable throughout this run. Sometimes our connection and synergy was really good. Other times, things were just really laggy and it was impossible to try to coordinate with each other, making movement much more difficult than we thought it would initially be. It also didn't help that Luke was having serious internet problems the first few nights of us trying this. At the outside part of the map where things start to fall apart, we immediately fell and missed our jump. Fortunately, we landed on this random platform that oddly let us see through the geometry, and then we got a checkpoint and it started falling immediately, eventually, which put us into a death loop, which was not the situation we wanted to be. So we ended up having to do some pretty advanced and extreme grapple coordinating with each other that we actually were surprised we were even able to manage to maneuver and pull these jumps off. And then of course tying that together, that every 5 minutes we had this beeper going off that would make us switch sides of the controller, meant that a lot of the times mid parkour we would have to realign and reconfigure who was doing what, and it actually throws you off way more than you think it would be. Eventually though, we did manage to climb our way back into the map and continued running through. We at one point used a grapple hook and caught this random piece of debris, which was terrifying for a moment, but fortunately nothing bad happened. And eventually we were able to clear this level, and this definitely served for an interesting start to say the least, but things would only get more complicated and more challenging as we went on. Foundation is the second level, and this level in general has a ton of parkour, and very early on did we realize we need to be careful because it's way too easy to get very carried away with the grapple hook, and we failed our parkour multiple times here. Actually, we died so many times in this opening area just trying to walk and maneuver. It's not really the most exciting thing to talk about when there's no real challenge other than just walking, but we definitely failed this area a ton. And when we made our way to the next area, we died a lot more and failed our way through that even more. Now, it is interesting when we run into a scenario where one of us is wanting to fight the enemies in front of us, and the other one just wants to run past them. It just leads to this really awkward backwards walking when we're trying to play through this, and it's kind of hilarious, but also it's very obvious that we aren't working in the same momentum or have the same ideas of how we should progress through the level. We did push our way up to picking up the weapon, and this is where the lag really kicked up. Now, Luke had been dealing with internet problems for the couple of days that we were trying this, and Luke even had an internet technician come to his house. The internet technician said that he was good to go and the internet was fixed, and the guy left, and then 10 minutes later Luke's internet went completely out again, and then another internet technician had to come over, and then Luke was on the phone with some support technician who said they'd never heard of the router that he had, but it was the router that they gave to Luke. I don't know. Luke has been trying to explain this to me, but it's laggy whenever we're talking in an Xbox party that it's kind of confusing, and I only get bits and pieces of the story each time he retells it. But yeah, we had this third mystery variable of the internet technician that couldn't get Luke's internet working that definitely played a pretty big role in us trying to do this challenge. We did have a moment though after picking up the weapon when we're kind of just looking around at the Forerunner area. We noticed that you can see humans and you can see some elites and you can see some grunts, and we realized that those are the only 3 species that are showcased in the Forerunner palettes. So we decided that these must be the 3 chosen species by the Forerunners. Yes, the humans, the grunts, and the elites. I just like that headcanon. Like, there could be some reclaimer grunt out there that we don't know about. There was some really choppy internet issues that we had for a little while where I even recorded my own screen with my phone just because I was so amazed with how bad it was. But eventually it did tighten up again and we were able to play without any issues for a little while. So eventually we made our way over to the final elevator where we had the boss fight, and right away we knew we had this one in the bag. We thought we were doing so good, and then we died. So we tried it again. We had a fusion coil mishap, so we ended up dying again. And yeah, the boss in this game, or the bosses in this game, they're not really kind of like a walk in the park like the Halo 2 bosses were on easier difficulties. These guys don't mess around, and in general, I definitely feel like Halo Infinite ramped up the difficulty a bit more than previous Halo games, but it still was kind of fun even though we died quite a bit here. We did finally clear the boss out and make our way up to the top, and when we started up on the 3rd level, we decided we were going to spend our Spartan core that you get right away, and navigating the menus is something stupid. Like, we don't have to do this co-op. We can just have one person control it and upgrade Chief, but we decided to stick to our split controller ways, and just navigating the menus was something stupidly difficult at times, and it took more coordination than you would think, but we did eventually upgrade our grapple hook. So it was now time for us to enter the grand open world, but it was also during this time I decided I wanted to switch off of my main computer I was playing on and connect to Luke's computer through my laptop, which had a better screen than the monitor that I had. So I was using my MacBook from this part of the run forward, except for whatever reason I couldn't get my Xbox controller to work, so I ended up dusting off the old PlayStation 4 controller, and for whatever reason that worked. So it was weird playing Halo Infinite, or half of Halo Infinite's control part, with a PlayStation 4 controller. It was just odd. So going into the next part, we had two goals in mind. Firstly, we were going to activate the airstrike Easter egg, which would help clear up this area, meaning we wouldn't have to fight as hard. And secondly, we were going to grab that tank weapon glitch that gives us infinite tank ammo, and we completely forgot to do this, and you can't come back to this area and pick up the tank gun later, so whoops. After clearing this open area though, we did continue on like normal, and we ended up doing one of the fobs along the way so we could get some of the Spartan cores in the vicinity because we really wanted to upgrade our grapple because that thing's really fun to use. After we had our stuff upgraded a little bit and we picked up some of the Spartan cores, we decided to move on to the tower, which actually had quite a few enemies. Now, it was a little interesting because sometimes there would be some long shots that we couldn't really do quite right, and a lot of the times we'd have to get in close to kill a lot of the enemies, and it was always awkward whenever we would be in the middle of a fight and then the alarm would go off telling us to switch sides of the controller. It just led to some weird moments along the way. Nonetheless, this part wasn't all that bad. We hit the switch, went up inside of the tower, pushed our way to the top, and we had a fun little fight with the dude up there. It wasn't actually that bad like we thought it would be. However, the next section we had to go to was the construction site, and this part was absolute chaos. Seriously, this part is actually really hard because there's a ton of enemies everywhere and we're running around like monkeys trying to figure out how to even move and look in the right direction, let alone trying to clear out some of the enemies so we can figure out how to get these things to come up so we could break the things and continue on with our quest. It was actually really hard and we ended up resetting quite a few times here, but we did eventually clear the areas and we pushed up to fight Bassus, who kind of just died. It wasn't that bad, actually. Going into the next level, we kind of just decided that since combat wasn't our strong suit at all, just trying to speed run around the enemies and running for our lives would be our best option. So we decided to become pro speedrunners using the grapple hook as often as possible to just zoom through the level. Things are going pretty well until we got to the part with the skimmer and we ended up trading kills with the skimmer. That was fun. And we had to reset the last checkpoint. So next we had to make our push over to the spire, and outside, surprisingly enough, the hunter battle wasn't that bad. I mean, the hunters aren't all that bad, especially in this open area because there's a lot of places you can get cover and you just kind of punch, shoot a little, and then grapple, and punch, shoot, let your shields recharge. And honestly, you're good to go. You don't have to worry about like jackals trying to snipe you in the midst of this battle. So this in particular hunter fight isn't as bad. So after that, we were going up a grav lift and we would be on the level Spire, which honestly is a little bit of a walking simulator. There's not too much going on. Though I do have to say, the boss fight up here is an absolute pain with this method of playing. Not only do you not have a large variety of weapons to pick and choose from, kind of imply that you're going to want to use a shotgun or a shock rifle, both of these guns either go through ammo way too quickly or are incredibly difficult to aim when you're playing with one person controlling the walking movement. And while the boss isn't too hard in itself, the fact that he can just beam you if you're standing still just means that one player kind of has to keep moving to keep our Master Chief from standing still getting shot at, which makes aiming a whole lot harder, especially when there's latency. So this part was actually one of the most challenging parts at this point in the run so far. We spent a long time in this boss fight, and maybe it's partially the fact that my aim is just so atrocious because it just seemed like it constantly was either lagging slightly or then like catching up in the program. It was definitely rough, but at this point in our playthrough, Luke's internet was doing a lot better than those early days, so we were mostly having stable connections, though we still had these weird lag spikes that would make the latency seem much more aggressive than other times in the run. Eventually though, we did end up clearing out this boss, which was a huge relief. Coming out of that level, we had to go run and hit the 3 AA guns for deactivation, which wasn't that bad. We just kind of zoomed our way over to all of the points, just to realize we had to go do another boss fight pretty much immediately after, which is that double boss fight with the chopper guy. Now, the chopper guy actually was hard, but after we were able to take the chopper from him, we realized that it's even harder just trying to drive a chopper together. And we ended up actually using a ghost to take out the enemies mostly. And then when the timer switched, Luke was in charge of walking after we cleared the bosses, and I got randomly disconnected. And for a solid minute or so, Luke thought that I was just lagging or not talking or something, and he was wondering why I wasn't looking where we had to go and was trying to just figure it out by only controlling half of the controller. It was funny, but no, my internet just died there. And then after we reconnected, we decided since we were gonna have to go and hit all of these different towers, we would just try to zoom through it as fast as possible, though it wasn't quite as easy as those AA towers. At first, we went to the main one. Of course, you have to clear all of the enemies out. We did end up using a Banshee to make flying from one tower to the other a little bit easier, though we did struggle a lot with the combat in these outside sections. It actually kind of was hell. We were getting just completely destroyed by the larger amounts of enemies, and we kind of noticed it's right around this point, which is a big turning point in the campaign, where the difficulty actually does kind of start to ramp up. And even if you're on a lower difficulty, it still presents itself as a decent enough challenge here, and it definitely was showing that we wouldn't have as much of a walk in the park as maybe we thought we would when we first started off this challenge. So we struggled our way to the first tower, went in there, activated the sequence, went to the next tower, struggled our way with some wraiths, which were not as much fun, but we did eventually clear that area and the tower, and then made our way to the last tower where we had to fight off some hunters, which wouldn't have been as bad if there weren't a ton of other enemies shooting at us, which kind of made the challenge a bit harder. We had to clear out some of the side enemies, and then we tried to just take out the hunters using a skewer as fast as possible. But eventually this led us back into the indoor section on the level Nexus, which for the most part is a straightforward level with some gondola rides in it and running past a bunch of enemies. It wasn't actually all that bad. There were just some sections where we kind of had to navigate through some tight hallways, and it's always confusing trying to figure out which way you're going, because sometimes you feel like you got spun around, especially when you're not in complete control of the Master Chief. You're only controlling half of him. And from there, we continued on into the level Command Spire, which is just like Spire earlier on in the campaign, except this time there's a bunch of enemies you have to fight your way through. And while we tried running past a lot of them, we still had to fight our way through some of them at various times, which was a little bit difficult, and eventually we make our way up to the top where we have to do another boss fight. However, this time around, the boss fight wasn't as hard, surprisingly. Maybe it was because our internet connections were stronger on this day, so it wasn't as bad as when we first fought the boss, but it still was a notable challenge nonetheless to take out, and we literally came so close to dying at the very end when we finally did beat this boss. Like, it was really close, so maybe it could have been a lot harder had we had to die and restart over another time. And then we get teleported to this other Forerunner structure or something, and for this one, we were ready just to get outside again, get a breath of fresh air. We knew that tank level was coming up, which we were looking forward to, so we kind of just ran through this next area as fast as we could, though there is these really annoying sections where you have to run and grab these power seeds and fight all these big boy bad guys, and we kind of did that the best that we could. It is a little hard fighting some of these brutes, especially when there's a bunch of them in close quarters, or a bunch of them just kind of chase after you for a while, but we were doing okay enough at this point. But we really knew that things would really start to ramp up in difficulty once we got past this level, going into some of the bigger fights that kind of conclude the main campaign of Halo Infinite. So while this section wasn't that hard to navigate through, and there's a lot of story exposition, we weren't too sure how some of those bigger boss fights featuring in the second to last and last level would turn up when we got to that part in the campaign. So next we're moving on to the final leg of this run, and things definitely get a little bit more interesting in this final act, and some things definitely did not go the way that we had anticipated them to go. So we were on the little tank mission where we kind of drove a tank for a little bit, but driving the tank itself is kind of awkward in this split controller setup. So after we got to the first fence, we realized it would be a lot easier if we just went on foot, especially because we were starting to get a hang of maneuvering in general. So that was the route we ended up taking. We ran past a ton of enemies, and eventually we made our way to the great old House of Reckoning. And I'll be honest, I had lower expectations of this level as far as difficulty, because it's mostly a lot of waves, and then we thought the later part with the bosses would ramp up in difficulty quite a bit. Now, interestingly enough, it almost seemed like this whole concept flipped. We had a lot harder of a time in the little battleground firefight areas that you have to go through at the beginning of the level. There was just a lot of random things that would kill us, and there was just weird issues with the controlling setup the way this was. So it was a bit chaotic, and it would be a little bit frustrating whenever we ended up dying and then had to revert to a previous checkpoint that seemed to be further back than what we thought was fair. Eventually, though, we did fight our way through the first set of enemies, and then we were on to the next wave of enemies, and that was also pretty intense. The hunters definitely don't mess around, and these are the stronger red banished hunters, so trying to fight these things while one person is controlling part of it is a little bit difficult. And we also realized that sometimes one of us would be trying to convince the other person to go for cover, but the communication wasn't always there, so going for cover or taking the shot at the right time never seemed to always line up the way that we hoped it would. But still, we did manage to chip our way through this and pass this section. Then we go on to the good old Blade Master boss fight, which we fully anticipated to be very difficult, and it really wasn't. I mean, we just punched the guy a couple of times, did some sidestepping. Maybe it helped we put some of our Spartan cores in upgrading our health a little bit, which made our endurance so much better at this boss fight. But honestly, he wasn't that bad, especially on this difficulty, considering how hard everything else seemed to have been up until this point. The Blade Master kind of was a walk in the park. Oh well, so next we were moving on to Escharam for this next boss fight, and once again, this one was a little bit chaotic. We found ourselves running for our lives at certain points, and then trying to wait for the opportunity to quote-unquote strike, and interestingly enough, things were going smoothly. We had a couple really close encounters where we almost died and would have to reset, but things were alright at this point at least. But then, interestingly enough, in the final wave of the fight, or the final phase or stage of the fight, when he kind of goes ham with his gravity hammer, for whatever reason, we ran into this weird glitch where him swinging his gravity hammer wouldn't damage us. It was really weird. We didn't know that was happening at first until we're like, why is our health so good constantly? Like, we're just kicking butt here, and we don't know what happened. There was just a glitch. He just couldn't hurt us, so we just stood there punching him while he hit us with the hammer. It didn't even phase Master Chief. That was kind of funny. So after a triumphant battle against Escharam, we were headed off to the final level of the game and the final boss fight at the end of that. Now, the level itself isn't all that bad. You can, for the most part, just run past absolutely everything. That's kind of what we did. We did the best we could, at least. There are some parts where you have to pick up power seeds once again, and in those places we had to fight some of the enemies in the way. For the most part, it was just kind of a fun little jog through a level with some campaign exposition dump kind of in the middle of it, and otherwise we continued through this level, making our way to that final and epic boss fight that would pretty much make or break this entire run. We'd made it so far already. We were optimistic, but we also wanted to know if this would even be possible with this last boss fight, and the fact that we know from our other playthroughs this boss is pretty fast, and it's going to be a little bit of a challenge to try to keep up. So going into it, we definitely just focused mostly on taking out all of the extra banished enemies that come running in right away, because those are definitely the #1 priority, and those can just knock you out and make you have to redo the whole boss fight over again. So whenever we were trying to clear out those sections, it only ever really seemed like we were focusing on going after the Harbinger whenever there was a opportunity that kind of just showed itself. We also were a bit concerned with what weapons we would have, but these banished enemies running in there are kind of extra strong, and they carry UNSC weapons a lot of the time, so we were able to pick up a shotgun, which does help with killing some of the enemies. Other than that though, you kind of just have to wait for your chance to strike, and that's kind of what we did. We just went after it when we were ready to go for the attacking mode, and we did just narrowly make it out of that alive. There were a couple of close moments, but once again, we did prevail over another boss, and this time around, it meant that we were able to complete Halo Infinite with this random co-op, co-pilot setting that we concocted using Parsec, and actually, it was pretty cool to be able to pull this off. This was really interesting, and it definitely tested Luke and I's patience with Halo Infinite, but it was also kind of fun. So if you enjoyed this, maybe decide to subscribe with notifications on so you get notified every time we upload brand new videos. You can also join our Discord. There's a link in the description down below if you want to hang out with us. But that's it for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you all next time with a brand new video.